Hello and welcome to episode 95 of Can We Still Be Friends, a podcast that tests the limits of the friendship between two people who mistake movie taste for personal morality. I'm Nate Goss, here with Ryan Ebling. Today, we welcome Dr. Bradley Rettler, a longtime friend of Ryan's and a professor of philosophy at the University of Wyoming. For this conversation, Brad wanted to talk about Hamilton, one of the biggest musicals of all time, and the subject of many conversations and think pieces since its debut in 2015. The conversations and debates were rekindled when the filmed version of the stage production was released on Disney Plus in July 2020. We'll talk to Brad about what Hamilton means to him and what Hamilton's legacy might be as we look at it years later as the world changes.
As Nate said, Hamilton is one of the biggest musicals of all time, and of course everyone's heard of it in some fashion. It became a sensation in every sense of the word. Lin-Manuel Miranda established himself as a superstar performer and writer. The stage production won 11 Tony Awards out of a record-setting 16 nominations and catapulted actors Daveed Diggs, Pippa Sue, Anthony Ramos, Leslie Odom Jr., and Renee Ellis Goldsberry into stardom as well. It's a sort of phenomenon that only comes around every few decades and was most recently nominated for 9 Primetime Emmys.
So how has our experience with Hamilton changed over the years?
Keep listening.
How does a bastard, orphan, son of a whore, and a Scotsman dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean by providence, impoverished and squalor, grow up to be a hero and a scholar? The $10 founded father without a father got a lot farther by working.
All right, that was the very famous, almost iconic beginning to Hamilton, the movie that we're doing today. Obviously a musical first.
Yeah.
And this is they recorded the stage production, but that is the introduction to many of the characters and certainly to Alexander Hamilton, who became a phenomenon. Which, who saw that coming?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like at one point he was sort of a forgotten founding father, I feel like.
You know why I know his name? I knew his name.
The $10 bill?
No, the milk commercial, the Got Milk commercial, where they ask who shot Alexander Hamilton, and the guy had taken a bite of a peanut butter. Yeah, peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and couldn't say Aaron Burr to win some money.
I am just now remembering.
You
this.
forgot that?
I forgot that.
Oh,
yeah,
wow,
that's pretty great. Yeah,
that's the only way I knew the name Aaron Burr or Alexander
I'm surprised
Hamilton.
they didn't bring that into the musical.
That's true.
That reference. There's so many different references.
Aaron Burr takes a shot of milk or something during Not Throwing Away My Shot. Well, that
peanut butter
voice you heard, is the voice of our guest today, Dr. Bradley Rettler, professor of philosophy at University of Wyoming, and a friend of mine from way back. Welcome, Brad.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. Good to be here. Excited to talk about Hamilton.
Yeah. How far back is way back, guys? How far back we going here?
Well, we met in middle school. Not to go too deeply into it,
Let's go deep.
You lived in Singapore and then moved back to the States.
I started in 8th grade, and we went to church together.
But we became friends a little bit. We became good friends a little bit later, once we were in high school together. After college, we didn't live in the same place, but we kept our friendship going, and now it's mainly through conversation than it is time spent together. But
was there? I vaguely heard something about bands being played in together, right?
That's right.
Yeah, I think so. We were in the same youth group when I was in 8th grade and Ryan was in 6th grade. Then I went up to high school and Ryan remained in middle school. But then we decided to start a band. And there weren't that many kids in the youth group that wanted to play music. But Ryan wanted to learn guitar and I wanted to learn drums.
Nothing screams great band than a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old learning their instrument.
Exactly.
And loving pop punk.
So after the world tour,
after things calmed down, we could really take stock of our friendship.
There were several shows that we played that were attended by more than our family members.
Whoa.
Brad was one of my, not to get, well, we just need to air all the dirty laundry. Brad was one of my first significant breakups when the band kicked me out.
Oh, this is happening. All right. We'll get to Hamilton, but do tell.
Yeah, you think the founding of the country is an interesting history. No, I don't think there's much to say other than I was learning guitar and not good at it, and we had a much better guitar player come and join the band.
And that guitar player and you had creative differences, according to the guitar player.
Creative being, he said, I know how to play guitar and you don't.
It was just real snooty about knowing which chords to play when. I don't know if Mike listens to the podcast, but I have seen Mike throughout the years. I've seen him pretty recently, and I have no problem with Mike. And Mike is an incredible guitar player and a great musician. Yeah. But it's interesting when we talked about doing the episode, Brad, a lot of the movies that were kind of foundational to me that we'd already talked about are movies that we've seen together that are kind of movies that have been a shared experience.
We had very few movies. And we would just watch them over and over and over. So if we were hanging out in my basement, it was the default was to rent Austin Powers.
Yeah.
And if we couldn't think of a particular other movie to watch, we'd watch Austin Powers again.
Yeah. Isn't it funny that none of us thought to buy it?
We would have saved so much money.
Oh man. Yeah. So why Hamilton then? What if it couldn't be something that was kind of foundational to your as you think back on movies? What made you pick Hamilton?
Well, a couple of reasons, I guess. I have always loved rap music. And then second, I've gotten more into musicals the older I've gotten, listening to soundtracks, going to them, appreciating the vocal quality and the lyrics. So most of what I listen to these days, like, for example, if I'm making breakfast in the morning and I have the kids downstairs, we're usually listening to like the Moana soundtrack. So I like musicals and I like rap, and the overlap of those is one. There's one rap musical, as far as I know. If there are more, please tell me. I'll listen to them.
Now, you lived in New York while Hamilton. When did you live in New York?
I lived in New York City from July 2017 to July 2018.
And were you able to see Hamilton in that time?
I was not. No.
But you were seeing a lot of Broadway musicals when you were living there, right?
I saw several, yeah. I would sign up. So each of them has like an app where you can get cheap tickets. And the cheap tickets for Hamilton are $5. The regular price tickets for Hamilton at the time, at least, were $650. So I literally signed up every single day for 365 days for Hamilton $5 tickets. And I never won.
Was that was sort of the ham for ham kind of lottery thing that they did? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, by the time I was doing it, it was an app. But before that, you would stand out and they'd give you like a lottery ticket. And then while you were waiting for the drawing, they would do like early performances.
Yes.
The ham for ham.
Which I think was also kind of the buzz around it as well. Like not only was it this huge phenomenon, hot show you really can't get tickets to, but isn't it kind of cool that they'd have this system to try to get people who could never afford to go, at least some to go in. And not only that, but they're kind of performing outside the theater beforehand for the people waiting for the lottery, that was just kind of also part of this like pot and stew of Hamilton, the phenomenon, the thing that was just everybody was talking about.
Yeah, for something to be sort of successful in a conventional gate-kept sort of world that was also a grassroots sort of populist phenomenon at the same time was really unique.
Yeah. Well, can I ask, though, have you ever had the chance to see Hamilton as a musical? Or was it mostly the cast recording and this Disney Plus release of the filmed version?
Yeah, it was. I have not yet seen it. So it was supposed to come. It came to Denver. So I live in Wyoming now. It came to Denver a few months before I moved here. And so it was slated to come back to Denver maybe last year, or maybe Salt Lake City last year, which is only a 5-hour drive for me. So I was thinking, now I have a real job. I have actual money. I could go see it. And then everything shut down for the pandemic. So now I believe the tour will be restarting soon, and I intend to go see it live. But yeah, so far it's just the recording and the Disney Plus movie version of the recording.
Which I think we alluded to in our last episode. It's one of the rare things me and Ryan have experienced together. We can probably count on one hand the number of movies we've seen together in the same room. But we did go see Hamilton together in Chicago. But for me, this is the only musical that I was into the cast recording and didn't even feel like I needed to see the musical. Like really, I was like, it would be so awesome if I could see the musical, but this cast recording is amazing. And Hamilton, the cast recording, which I'm guessing is sort of what all three of our introduction to Hamilton was.
Yep.
It sounded different. For this rewatch, I got the Hamilton the Revolution, the sort of official libretto of Hamilton. I'm going through it as I'm watching it, and there's a whole section on Questlove, actually. He's got a whole section in there. And he was the one that was sort of like, bring up the drums, bring up the bass. Like, basically, like, he made it so it didn't sound like a typical cast recording. He gave that cast recording a hip-hop flavor.
Yeah.
Which I thought was pretty...
revolutionary.
It is revolutionary, but it's hard to separate it now because it was such a phenomenon, and now... within the pop culture, Hamilton is kind of like water. Like, we're just sort of used to it. We almost treat Hamilton as if it was just always there. And it's hard to kind of put yourself back into like, how the hell is this actually being pulled off? I think was the question I kept having the first time I listened to it.
Did it work for you right away, Brad, when you first heard it? Was it like immediate you were in, or did it take some time? What was your like first reaction?
Well, there was a lot of buzz about this new musical going on. And I listened to a lot of musical soundtracks, but none of them had I not seen the musical before enjoying the soundtrack. Les Mis, Wicked, Waitress, The Band's Visit, etc. And I've seen all of the musicals first. So this one, people were talking about it, and I was like, well, you know, I'll wait and I'll go see it. And then they were talking about it being rap, and I'm like, oh man, these musical theater people. And to my consternation, I didn't know who Lin-Manuel Miranda was.
I didn't either. So, no clue.
So two things happened at relatively short time. So first, I was talking to my wife, Lindsay, about it. And she said, oh, Lin-Manuel Miranda, I saw, when I was in New York City on vacation once, I saw one of his musicals, In the Heights. And it was amazing. It had this different kind of sound, this different kind of music, kind of salsa. And I was like, oh, that sounds cool. Like maybe this person's trying to do something different. And then on my YouTube suggested viewing, there was Lin-Manuel Miranda performing the opening song to Hamilton at the White House at the invitation of President Obama. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to sit down and listen to a 2.5-hour soundtrack or something, but I'll watch this 4-minute video.
I'm thrilled the White House called me tonight because I'm actually working on a hip-hop album. It's a concept album about the life of someone I think embodies hip-hop, Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton. You laugh! But it's true. He was,
and I thought the introduction was hilarious. How he talks about the original gangster Alexander Hamilton, and then the opening chords come in. And it's just him and the piano at this time, right? Him and Alex Lacamoire.
How does a bastard orphan son of a whore and a Scotsman dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean by providence, impoverished and squalor, grow up to be a hero and a scholar?
And the first thing I notice is this guy's got flow, right? He's not pretending. This is a guy who's listened to hip hop a lot growing up, and it's immediate.
14, they placed him in charge of the trade and charter, and every day while slaves would be.
And then I notice the rhyming. It's so natural, but so interesting. You know, these are complicated rhymes, but they sound perfect. And then the next clip that came up was performing History Has Its Eyes on You when Obama was getting ready to leave office. So I didn't get into it until after this.
Yeah.
And that was amazing. I had tears in my eyes watching this. And so I think a few days later, Lindsay was going to take our kids somewhere and I was going to clean the house. So I had like the whole morning and I thought, okay, I'm going to download Hamilton. I'm going to listen all the way through to this soundtrack. And then I didn't play anything else for months after. If I was listening to my podcast listening slipped, everything slipped because I was just getting as much Hamilton as I could all the time.
I mean, I feel like that was the way it was with me too. That I would go to put it on and kind of like look at Kelsey sheepishly, like, yeah, I'm doing it again, and she'd be like, go for it. And I think the fact that it's a sung-through show helps a ton.
Yeah.
The fact that the whole show is sung through makes it way more accessible to people who haven't seen it.
I had heard interviews with Lin-Manuel Miranda beforehand saying basically once he started with such a strong first song, he's like, we can't go back to talking. We have to do the whole musical with song.
Well, I think that that's a really good point. The fact that you can piece together the entire narrative just through the cast recording, I think contributes a lot to its success because very few people did see it. I mean, the movie just came out last year. So it really was a lot of people. Their sole experience with Hamilton is this cast recording. That cast recording wouldn't mean a whole lot if you had to kind of piece together the narrative.
Well, and really get to know all the characters.
That too, yeah.
You can feel emotionally invested in just the recording. I mean, how many years did I listen to it and I would still cry at it's Quiet Uptown.
Yes.
I'd never seen any of it. It just was the impact of it was all there in the music. I will say, okay, so I guess maybe I thought when people were talking about like hip hop musical, I expected it to be like fully hip hop. And I was a little bit surprised at how musical it sounded still. The end of Hamilton when they do like the big cast, like harmonizing, and then it ends with like, bump. I was kind of like, oh, that's a really musically, like kind of cheesy. And then My Shot ends the same way, like My Shot, boom. I'm like, okay, they're going to do this every time. And so for me,
that's the shot, Ryan. The shot.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So I did like it. I was sort of like, I liked it in terms of musical theater, but the hip hop part of it for me was when A Farmer Refuted came on. That feels like sort of like the conceptual thesis of the musical.
That piece is incredible.
Right. Because you've got like a very traditional song, even a white guy just singing this song very well. And it's very boring. And then and then he comes in and starts rapping over the exact same thing. It's like, whoa, okay, this is what they're talking about. This is a hip hop musical. Like, I can't expect it to be hip hop. But that was where I really felt like the hip hop credentials really kind of came through.
The king shows you his mercy. For shame, for shame.
Yeah, he'd have you all unravel at the sound of screams, but the revolution is coming. The have-nots are gonna win this. It's hard to listen to you with a straight face. Chaos and bloodshed already haunts us. Honestly, you shouldn't even talk. And what about Boston? Look at the cost and all that we've lost, and you talk about
Congress does not speak.
My dog speaks more eloquently than me.
And this is one of the things that I think is really brilliant about the music, because I was sort of like, hip-hop is sampling. How do you do hip-hop with only original music, right? Like, that's such a big part of it. And the musical ends up sampling itself over and over and over again. And even in that song, it basically says, here's the sample we're using, this melody from Samuel Seabury. And then now we're gonna sample it and rap over it and change the cadence of it and change the rhythm of it and change the meaning of it. And that to me was the feat that sold it for me, was the musical's ability to sample itself.
That track in particular. So I remember I wanted to look up the lyrics so that I could see what the sort of point counterpoint exactly was, because sometimes they're hard to entangle. And the third or fourth Google search result was from the Founders Online National Archives, written by Alexander Hamilton in 1775, a pamphlet called The Farmer Refuted. And it's like 30 pages long. So Lin-Manuel Miranda read this and then turned it into a hip hop song.
Yeah, right.
That also, and was surmising what the farmer had written from The Farmer Refuted, and then mixed in this idea of, rapping over the top of someone else's beats, and then doing it so well that the beat becomes more associated with you than it does with the original. And I mean, so yeah, we have American history on the one hand, we have hip hop music, and then we have hip hop culture.
It's so intricate, it's all woven together. You look at, like, for instance, where Angelica does the whole rewind. Satisfied. This thing is so dripping with creativity. It's hard to even know where to, like, drop in, because that's almost like film. To do a flashback, like to basically have an entire scene and then redo the scene in a rewind, but it's an entirely different song. It's telling you that these two characters are singing different tunes.
Right.
Then that brings the sampling in by having the helpless refrain kind of just thrown in there as a sample, So it reminds you that, Eliza, her song is still going during this rewind.
I want to take him far away from this place, then I turn and see my sister's face, and she is. And I know she is. And her eyes are just. And I realize three fundamental truths at the exact same time.
And each character has their refrains.
Even their names are sung the same way throughout.
Yeah. I think that what's crazy about Hamilton is how many different ways your mind is firing when you're watching this. And we haven't even gotten into the way that your mind is firing as far as everybody that goes to see this is bringing their entire history with American history into this. Like, that's a lens that he is very aware of, I think. And it's just a really tricky thing that he's trying to pull off, on top of all the stylistic ways that he's trying to pull off a musical that's never really been done this way before.
He's kind of sampling education.
It's a little astounding and almost like a how dare you kind of way of like, okay, it's not enough just to reinvent the musical.
Right.
You've also got to like make it about history, which is such a trepidatious thing. It's just a very audacious thing to do.
Now, Satisfied, so of course we're talking a lot about the music because that's what this is. I mean, it's so music heavy, but I also want to talk about the movie, like the fact that we saw all this. I feel like Satisfied was a really illuminating song to watch too, partly because Helpless is so bright and it's such a big, like, packed with people. The stage is fully lit. Everybody is equally lit. It's about like the whole scene, the party, everything. And then Satisfied goes back and shows us that whole thing again. And it's very dim. It's in this sort of blue light. Really only Angelica is lit and Alexander I thought that was so cool how the ornateness of Helpless is juxtaposed with the stripped down version of Satisfied. And Satisfied itself is not a stripped down song.
No.
Like when it goes into I Know My Own Sister Like I Know My Own Mind, like that's just like an amazing beat and it stomps at that point. But it's the visual remains really stark. And I thought that was such a cool way to characterize Angelica as extremely powerful, somebody who has the power to stir our hearts with the song, but then also to visually show her as a very dissatisfied, a very sort of like lonely feeling person.
Something else to talk about is just the amazing casting of this. Because, I mean, it's easy to say now because we know who these people are. I didn't know who any of these people were before Hamilton.
Right.
And now
Even Lin-Manuel Miranda, who is apparently quite famous because In the Heights won best musical at
well,
the
that's
Tonys.
just how out of touch I am with what musical theater is doing, you know. I mean, obviously, they have had other Hamilton runs, and other people are playing these parts. And we saw the one in Chicago, and everyone did a really great job. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, just the casting of this thing is insane.
I think the only person that was cast that we would have experienced very much before was King George III, played by Jonathan Groff, who was also in Frozen. He was Kristoff.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Yeah. Which actually, and this is going to be another embarrassing admission of mine, because I listened to the cast recording and didn't do a ton of digging beyond figuring out who Lin-Manuel Miranda was, basically. And it took me way too late to realize that, Lafayette and Jefferson were the same person. And that and that Hercules Mulligan and James Madison were the same person. Like, it took me way too late to figure that out. I knew Daveed Diggs was Thomas Jefferson, but it took me a long time to remember. I was like, oh, he's Lafayette too, which again was like,
Jefferson didn't have a French accent. It's not the same actor.
But I think it's to those actors' credits that they changed themselves up enough in their voice alone to where I could reasonably think those were two different actors,
Well, and
two or four different actors, I guess it would be.
And I'm sorry, the actor who played Hercules Mulligan and James Madison, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce his name. Okierite.
He goes by Oak, if we want to just sort of shorthand Oak there.
You don't pick it up on the cast recording, but watching it, he plays Hercules Mulligan is a ball of energy, and James Madison is just this
weakling.
Yeah, like this sickly kind of. And that was a big help to watching it too. Was just sort of like, oh, that's why Madison's so sort of quiet, and why it's funny when Jefferson's going off in the debate. And then James Madison just says France. And it's oh, that's their dynamic. Madison and Jefferson. Madison's just this really quiet, kind of logical person, and Jefferson's the personality. And there's something about that, like kind of dual casting. Why did they choose the same person to play? So it's Lafayette and Jefferson, it's Hercules Mulligan and James Madison, it's John Lawrence and Philip, and it is Peggy and Mariah are the four roles that are double cast, right? What does that add to it for you guys?
My first thought was, this is to save money.
That was what I thought, yeah.
This is an off-Broadway show, and who knows how big it's going to get. And these early people are not going to show up again, so let's have them play two roles. But I think it's really cool when you see at the beginning, in that the clip we played at the beginning, that song at the end, they say, "We fought with him." So Lafayette and Hercules Mulligan say "we fought with him." Also, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison say "we fought with him," and the "we fought with him" is different. In the one, it's "we fought beside him," and the other, it's "we fought against him."
Damn.
And then
because there's no indication who they are when they say that.
Yeah.
Right. Like at the beginning, they're just wearing the cream colored sort of clothes.
Yeah. Wow. We died for him. Both John Lawrence. And I mean, in a more extended sense, died for him. And Philip died, right? Philip died defending his honor.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, there is like some, at least at a large enough scale, thematic overlap between these characters such that they can say this.
Yeah. And it's not unprecedented in musicals. Godspell has a double cast role. John the Baptist, the same actor, plays Judas in every performance. But yeah, I had never thought, Brad, of thinking of all the characters that people played speaking in that first song.
Yeah.
I think also the Me, I Loved Him, sung by Angelica and Eliza, and also I think Peggy and Mariah.
Yeah, right.
Maybe.
Yeah. Okay, so this is kind of jumping a little bit, but I want to talk about Mariah and Say No to This and that whole kind of part of the play. It's where generally musically I'm less interested. Story-wise, I'm a little less interested in it too. But the more I think about it, the more I am not comfortable with the portrayal of Mariah. And is it I don't know. Did you guys have thoughts about that song or that segment of the musical, specifically Say No to This? And what I'm thinking of is the idea that just like the full seductress, that he there's a way that you could watch it, and there's kind of a reinforcing of a stereotype there
Of the temptress.
Yeah.
That's, it has ulterior motives. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the keys to understanding that song is, so Aaron Burr comes on and he says, Angelica, Eliza are gone, Alexander's alone. I'll let him tell it. So we're getting the Alexander version of the Temptress.
Yeah.
We're not getting necessarily what really happened. We're getting what Alexander is willing for us to know about what happened. One that paints him as this innocent guy, missing his wife, being conflicted in his feelings with Angelica. Right then, the Temptress walks in, led me to her bed. Maybe. We also know from earlier in the musical that he was a ladies' man, that Martha Washington named her feral tomcat after him. So maybe there's more going on here than what Alexander's telling us.
I think that's a good point. I hadn't thought about it that way, but I think that is probably intentional to tell the audience that you're getting Alexander Hamilton's point of view on this, because it's not always his point of view. You're going to get the man's perspective on this, explicitly so,
Yeah.
And I guess, Ryan, are you kind of uncomfortable with never then getting her perspective on it, or getting a more sympathetic ear to that? Or
I think that it's, and this kind of gets at what is Hamilton trying to do, and some of the criticism of it as far as race and other things, that it's being so revolutionary in terms of musical theater and in some ways in the way history is told, not so much in what history is told, right? So this is a pretty standard telling as far as our educations in America has gone. It's just told in a different way. And so it feels in a way that even though, so we're getting Alexander Hamilton's perspective on this. It's a very standard telling of it, of removing his agency from it. That like, well, she was, she was half dressed. She spread her legs. She was acting this way. She was, say no to this could almost be like, yeah, she was asking for it. Like who wouldn't take advantage of this woman who is poor? I'm not. Who has no power? I do. And, the worst thing that happened was it damaged his reputation. I think
in the musical though, you are supposed to understand the predicament she's in too.
I think so. I think
you're right. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that there is at least some attention being paid to this was her situation. And it wasn't a good one either.
And I don't need, I don't want it to telegraph everything, right? Like I don't need there to be a song where with 2020 hindsight and 2021 hindsight that like, he realizes his power or like somebody like, whatever. Like the reality of the situation was he did have that power and there was no check on that. And the worst thing that happened to him was his reputation was ruined. Like, and I also get that the musical, and this is one of the things that I like about the musical, is that Hamilton isn't a spotless protagonist.
No.
Right? Like Hurricane, we're kind of supposed to be like, this is a bad idea. Like, you write my way out. He thinks it's a good idea. The musical never fully comes out and says this was a bad idea, but you aren't supposed to hear it and be like, oh yeah, he can write his way out. What a great way to do this. And that's actually something that I think seeing it helped me understand that more, because you see Philip read the Reynolds pamphlet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But doesn't this ultimately get at what I think Hamilton is trying to tackle, which is that weird dichotomy of these were guys who they were in a lot of ways brilliant. I mean, think about it. Think about Hamilton, for instance. Like they can't even, it's almost like they have to try to pack in all the stuff he did. Like the fact that so he was a lawyer, but he was a great lawyer. But then he also sort of like constructed our entire financial system. Like in these days, those would be two totally separate fields. Yeah.
And nobody would do it in one lifetime.
Right. And then just writing. Oh, and by the way, he wrote the Federalist Papers, and he wrote most of them. And nobody writes that much stuff nowadays. Like there's just this acknowledgement of like these guys, while also very shitty, you cannot deny the brilliance and the productivity of these guys, which also, by the way, comes with hubris. Yeah. And comes with not knowing when to shut up, and comes with arrogance and thinking you're the greatest. And when you put a bunch of people like that together, they actually get really petty with one another. I like that this musical acknowledges so many dimensions of human nature in it, and uses the Founding Fathers as the lens for that. These people who we have historically lionized and who we have made into heroes. And it probably doesn't take them down enough pegs as a lot of people now looking at this with a more critical lens saying, well, you didn't talk about this and you left this part out and you didn't talk about this. It doesn't probably take them down enough pegs in some ways, but I do think that there is this acknowledgement of just the total messiness and murkiness of human nature in this. And it's through and through. Aaron Burr, it acknowledges that dueling is a stupid ass thing to do, but they did it.
We're going to do it. Yeah.
And these guys were still brilliant.
Yeah.
These brilliant guys devolved into like dueling with each other, like childhood, like, playground fights, basically, like I'm sorry, I'm hogging the mic right now, but his source material is Ron Chernow.
Right.
His source material is not Howard Zinn. His source material is not a lot of the historians who have sort of taken as their field and their study ways in which we need to critically look at the power structures of this country. His source material is more like in the vein of David McCullough and Ken Burns. And like, I think that there is a way in which we should criticize that. Like your choice of this was sort of to take a more traditional, idealized in some ways historical approach, but then look at what he's doing with that also.
And I think, Nate, to your point about the source material that was used, I think at some points there are nods to this being the kind of source material, and saying, even though I'm telling the same story that you've heard, the story that you've heard doesn't focus on certain ones of the characters. For example, it doesn't focus on an immigrant you know and love who's unafraid to step in. You don't hear about the role that immigrants played. It's glossed over. Even though it's told, like the story, I'm telling you the same story, but look who I'm looking at here and highlighting. And I think we get to this with Eliza at the end too, which I think we should talk about, that this is just as much Eliza's story as it is Hamilton's story. And nobody talks about, when they talk about the founding fathers, certainly before this, and maybe even since Hamilton came out, nobody talks about Eliza Hamilton and the role that Eliza Hamilton had in the founding of our country.
Yeah.
Which people have said is why the music is called Hamilton, not Alexander Hamilton, because it's Eliza's story as well.
Yeah.
And she gets the final word. And also, okay, so this is another thing that, and Nate and I were talking about this earlier this week. The perspective of white people, and myself as a white person too, thinking that avenues of the world, history, literature, philosophy, all this stuff, have been used by white gatekeepers to, elevate white voices and white perspectives on things. And the push to diversify the voices we listen to, for me, and I think for a lot of white people, has still kept them from those avenues and have said, okay, we're going to introduce your voice. It needs to be this totally different perspective. Like, it can't be anything. And I think that there could be something powerful to saying the Ken Burns, David McCullough, Ron Chernow, why not hear that sort of history, that traditional history, from a person of color? Why does a person of color have to tell this story that is completely different, right? Like, why can't we allow them to say, okay, we've got a more traditional telling of history. What does that sound like from a person of color?
Yeah.
And Lin-Manuel Miranda connected with Ron Chernow's book, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not like there weren't other historians writing. He could have found other writers. This was not 1920 that he was writing this music. Like, this was in 2008. There have been for some time, Howard Zinns and other people. And so I remember, like, in teaching in literature education right now, the conversation is basically like, students of color will not connect with white authors. And it's like, well, that's not true. Right? Like, my wife was listening to a podcast with, I can't remember her name, Samin Nosrat was talking, and
the author of Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat,
right,
famous chef. Yeah.
And she said her favorite book is A Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius by Dave Eggers. And the way that people in education talk now, she should not connect to that.
She'd almost be not allowed
and
to.
She shouldn't read it, right? Like, that should be like, but it's like, it's in its own way, it's continuing to gatekeep, to say that, like, this is how a person of color should be interacting, or this is the story they should tell. And I think Lin-Manuel Miranda wasn't looking to be as revolutionary as the size that Hamilton became would tell you. And we also need to remember that this came out during Obama's presidency. Like, that's when he was writing it. And the world changed in 2016.
The world turned upside down.
You could say.
But it did in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And things,
we had an insurrection.
Right. And so it does look different to us. But I think we also need to understand that I don't think Hamilton set out to make a revolutionary point. I think it was just trying to be revolutionary in the way it presented its story and in the voices and everything. And maybe it's fair to criticize it and ask some questions, but is it fair to fault it?
There was Hamilton backlash, especially last year. I feel like what Lin-Manuel Miranda was doing in its way was revolutionary. It maybe just wasn't revolutionary in the way some people wish it was.
That's what
and I think, that's exactly what you're saying, I think, Ryan. But what I would like to try to, like, remember is that, like, can you imagine how scandalized the real historical George Washington or the real historical Thomas Jefferson would feel about the casting choice of this?
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? Like, that itself is sort of a protest. Honestly, if you read Chernow or McCullough or watch Ken Burns, they don't ignore the problems. Right. They really don't. They just maybe don't make them central, and that can be a problem. It can be a problem to not give them the weight that they're due, to not really sit long enough with the idea of these people being slaveholders, and what that means. But I also think that there is something really protest-like in saying, now, building off of your ideas, Jefferson, Washington, Hamilton, I'm going to cast the people you never would have saw welcome to this party. Mm-hmm. And they are now. And that's my protest. My protest is to take your words, your ideas, and put them in the mouths of people you never thought should be able to say them.
And to say that history that was kind of designed to exclude us, we see ourselves in it. Like
Yes.
we have a part in this. It's not that we have a part in America going forward. We have a part in America from its inception.
I wanted to bring in a quote from Leslie Odom Jr. that was directly about the backlash, where he says, "But Hamilton was meaningful. There was protest in its time. The fact that it's been so successful and it's so ubiquitous, things are taken for granted about this show. The fact that it is the language of the streets, the fact that it is people that have historically been disenfranchised and shut out of a story, taking ownership of it and retelling the story in their own words. There's protest in that. So there was power in it. All I said to the young woman," and he's talking about a woman who said basically that she thought Hamilton was awful. The quote from the woman was, "My friends and I talk about Hamilton a lot, and we talk about the fact that we don't think it's revolutionary at all. We just think it's a bunch of people of color telling white people's story again. What do you think of that?" So this was all his response to that. So there was power in it. All I said to this young woman was, "I can't wait to see the show that you write. This is the beginning of a conversation, and I can't wait to see the show that it inspires." And I think that that's probably
And
the
he didn't
best.
mean it confrontational.
No.
Like,
I think
you
he
do
was,
better. He was just like,
he was saying
"You've
genuinely.
got thoughts now."
He was saying genuinely that this is history. History is a conversation. It's a conversation of like, this was what was revolutionary about Lin-Manuel Miranda and what he did in its time. And it feels weird to say in its time when we're talking about something that's not even 10 years old.
Yeah.
But the world did change.
Barely even 5 years old.
The world changed a lot. And so now we need new stories to tell from new people, but that doesn't mean that Hamilton didn't do its part, I guess,
You can see the words of Hamilton kind of echoing with Leslie Odom Jr. and with Lin-Manuel Miranda at the very last song. He says, "I wrote some notes at the beginning of a song someone will sing for me. America, you great unfinished symphony, you sent for me, you let me make a difference, a place where even orphan immigrants can leave their fingerprints and rise up." So you have the part of this being the beginning of the song, right? This is here, we started the conversation. Let's keep having the conversation. But let's remember that in America, and Lin-Manuel Miranda wasn't an orphan, Hamilton was, a place where immigrants can leave their fingerprints. And when I read Ron Chernow, I'm looking at the immigrants. I'm looking at who were you looking at? Tell the story of who you're looking at and make a musical out of it. But here's who I connect with when I read this Ron Chernow biography. And I notice that it was the immigrants who rose up. And maybe this is also somewhat of a call for people to rise up.
Yeah. It's also been really interesting to see in the protests of last summer, and I think most notably in Amanda Gorman's poem at the inauguration, that Lin-Manuel Miranda's words are used. Right? Yeah. Like, not only this is not a moment, this is a movement, is often used, but I feel like there were a couple times that Amanda Gorman directly quoted Hamilton. And Amanda Gorman's poem is so widely revered. And it's exactly what we're talking about. It's like, okay, what are you seeing here? Okay, not all of it. Maybe you don't connect with all of this, but if what you connect with, carry. What you push back against, change. And that's it. So nobody can have any problems with that. But I think there are things that I think maybe they would do differently. And I think the film version of In the Heights is testament to that, because In the Heights added scenes of a dreamer. Yeah. They added a scene,
all the DACA stuff,
where they go to a DACA rally, which isn't in the original version. A character feels out of place at Stanford, and that's about all as far as it goes in the musical. In the movie, she outlines specifically ways that she was racially profiled. And so I think within the Heights, they redid some stuff. They said, okay, people need us. It's not just about telling the story. Now we need to tell the specific aspects. It's not. And if they could do Hamilton again, I imagine they would add some of those things.
Yeah, or it's hard to say. There if you look at Hamilton the Revolution, there is in there a third rap battle that's about slavery that was cut. Of course, then there is fair criticism, I think, about the fact that he doesn't really even mention that George Washington owned slaves.
Cabinet Battle number 3 is on the Hamilton mixtape. performed.
Ooh, yeah.
Both sides performed by Lin-Manuel Miranda in kind of a demo style. The Hamilton mixtape also produced by The Roots. And it's really interesting. It starts off with this petition on the table from the Quaker delegation in Philadelphia calling on Congress to end the African slave trade and abolish slavery, written and signed by Ben Franklin. They have to debate whether to be for or against this petition, and they decide to stick with the 1808 deal. And the last line, or the last two lines, Madison, execute your plan to the letter. That is the plan to keep it from coming to a vote. Let's hope the next generation thinks of something better. So they punt it to the next generation.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of what is happening in here is with lines like that, you lose the gravity of them maybe with the rhyme, but it's saying the quiet part out loud, right?
Yeah.
Nobody would now say, let's not support H.R. 1, the Voting Rights Act. It's going to be too controversial. Let's hope the next generation thinks of something better. You wouldn't say it out loud, but it's like under the surface everywhere. So Lin-Manuel Miranda is bringing all that stuff up to the surface, and you can say it because it rhymes, and it's not going to be as controversial.
But if those had been words spoken by Hamilton, it would have tempered the kind of glowing feel about him on slavery. Instead, you get the amazing line of "Keep ranting, we know who's really doing the planting."
Yes,
which is, I mean, it's incredible. Like as far as
it's cathartic. You need it.
As far as a commentary on American history, that section is unbelievable. But Lin-Manuel Miranda gets to say that. He gets to have that mic drop line, and he never is forced to have the lines that would actually show. They even kind of skirt it with, well, every day while slaves were being traded and carted away, he was like, yeah, he was the one keeping books on slave trade. Like,
not to mention, he married into the Schuyler family. That was a slave-holding family. You know,
exactly. It's tough because he wasn't writing a history book. It was, so it's you kind of just have to look at what it is and what it's doing. It never meant to be the final word on American history. So just like that level of fame is always going to make something into something that it wasn't necessarily meant to be.
Oh, for instance, you'd look at like something like Sgt. Pepper's, and how many people just can't wait to tell you how much better Pet Sounds is, it's just, these are the debates that we have as soon as something becomes sort of like untouchable. And what, these things like Hamilton was untouchable. Well, now you've got a whole army of people that are like, well, let's take it down a few notches,
and it should be. It should never have been untouchable. It should be criticized. It isn't the final word. I don't want to act like it shouldn't be held accountable. So I think we've talked a lot about what it's not trying to do, but maybe it's criticized for. But Brad, thematically, what are some of the things that you like really connect with? What to you is like so meaningful or is thematically happening here?
The one that brings tears to my eyes without fail every single time is Dear Theodosia.
I'll do whatever it takes. I'll make a million mistakes. I'll make the world safe and sound for you. We'll come of age with our young nation. We'll bleed and fight for you. We'll make it right for you. If we lay a strong enough foundation, we'll pass it on to you. We'll give the world to you and you'll blow us all away someday.
I have a boy and a girl, and half of that song is sung to a boy and half of it's to a girl. And I think about the world that they're coming into and the world that I'm trying to create for them, and I wonder what I'm doing for that world. So we talked about how what Alexander's doing for his kids is like starting the Department of the Treasury and starting the first central bank. And
let's get on it. Let's do it.
I just think a lot about what kind of world I brought them into. Duncan was born shortly before Donald Trump became president. And after that is when I started listening to Hamilton. And I just kept thinking about the kind of world that I brought him into and the kind of country that I brought him into and the division in the country. And I want him to be the kind of person who's going to also make the world into a better place for his children. And I want the same now that I have another child for my daughter. So that one is one that really connects with me a lot.
I think that one brings the idea of legacy back down to earth. Like, it's not just about the legacy that you leave for, like, if you're Hamilton, a nation. It's the legacy that you leave for your own children. It's the impact that you. So that's sort of like for the normal folk like us. You know, it's kind of like you have a legacy too. Yeah. Like, what is the legacy that you plan to leave within your little sphere of influence? You know.
There are so many differences, of course, between my life and Alexander Hamilton's life. But what am I willing to do to lay a foundation? Or, I mean, we're not laying the foundation anymore, right? We're building the house, to extend the metaphor. Right. But we will pass on this nation to our kids, and we want to leave the nation better than the way that it was left for us. And arguably, some generations have done that much better than other generations, right? Uh-huh. In some generations, we've gone forward, and others, when they've been in charge, we've gone backwards. And I want to be part of a generation that is making the house better. And, you know, maybe renovating. Let's keep going with the metaphor. Yeah, right. Maybe renovating renovating some of the rooms that even Alexander...
Gutting the kitchen.
That's right. Yeah. Maybe we need to get some people in to look at the house and take their advice seriously about what parts of the house need to be changed, because we only listened to a certain group before. And
right, exactly. I think we could keep going with the metaphor for a while. Were there other themes, Brad, that you saw that you wanted to talk about, or are there songs that you wanted to talk about?
So yeah, I learned of this whole maybe almost sub-narrative after maybe the second of King George's songs. A person passes a letter to a woman. She reads the letter, and then a redcoat comes up and kills her, snaps her neck, I think. And from then on, she is the bullet.
Okay.
So you see her as she carries a bullet being shot right over Alexander. Of course, she's the bullet at the end in the duel. She's the bullet in the duel between George Eaker and Philip. And so, yeah, there's this like undercurrent of death portrayed singularly by this person, which is just really interesting. I don't know if it has any deeper of a story than, hey, wouldn't it be interesting if we did this? It's something I of course you'd never notice listening to it. You probably wouldn't notice if you went and saw Hamilton, the musical, in the theater. Right. You might not notice it if you watch the movie even 5 or 10 times.
Yeah, I mean, you've got that idea that sort of like that violence begets violence. Like if she was the victim of a violent death, then she kind of becomes the death of other characters, or the near death of other characters.
And one thing I noticed, it's not necessarily about the bullet, but just those scenes. And it's a lot of times it's the duel scenes, so things are also spinning. And I can't remember if, I mean, that is the stage, right? I mean, the camera spins, I think, too. But I mean, that's another sort of like film influence of like, this is like The Matrix. You know, that scene, by the way, where it freezes and then it's just Hamilton and his sort of internal dialogue. It's so late into the musical that maybe I'm kind of spent that I'd never really actually like sat with what was going on there as much as I did maybe with some of the earlier stuff. But that's a verse he's giving. Like, it's not over music or anything. He's just sort of delivering a verse, but he's like bringing in all the refrains over and over again. Like it was all there all along, you know? It's like it's a flash before your eyes, you know, but like you don't even need the music anymore. You don't need the melody anymore. You can just hear him spout out the words. And it just, again, fires all these things, all these synapses in your brain that connect everything to each other, you know?
He even says, there is no beat, there is no melody.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Eyes up, eyes up. I catch a glimpse of the other side. Lawrence leads a soldier's chorus on the other side. My son is on the other side. He's with my mother on the other side. Washington is watching from the other side. Teach me how to say goodbye. Rise up. Rise up, rise up, Eliza, my love, take your time. I'll see you on the other side.
The visuals of that one too are really powerful, where he sees Eliza and he sees Washington. You know, they're actually standing there, and then like Lawrence leads a soldier's chorus on the other side, and then Lawrence does like a spin, and it says Philip is on the other side, and like. The Anthony Ramos was just facing out as Lawrence, and then he turned around, and then he was Philip, and that was just really powerful too. Like, kind of brings it all all home. And that idea of bringing things together, they do that really obviously effectively, but like at really important times. And I want to ask you guys, as a way to lead into what I think might be my favorite song, what is your favorite song, if it's possible? And maybe it's changed over the course of time, but what's the song that like kind of I don't know, gets you, or is the one that is just your favorite song?
I don't. Yeah, that's really hard.
Does one just come to mind immediately when I ask that?
I guess it goes like Dear Theodosia to Guns and Ships to Burn. I absolutely love Burn.
Yeah.
Another like fairly traditional musical song.
Hurricane. I really like that insight into the hurricane in Hamilton's mind compared with the hurricane that killed or that he escaped from. This idea,
the one that almost killed him.
The idea of being able to write your way out, because that's what you've always done and it's always worked in the past, and so you're going to do it again, even though there's a great. If you guys haven't listened to the Hamilton mixtape, it's so good, and there's like a response to Hurricane and the Reynolds pamphlet where the person starts out, "Congratulations, you have invented a new kind of stupid, a never before seen kind of stupid, a damage you can never undo kind of stupid, a truly you didn't think this through kind of stupid." Let's review. You took a rumor that a few, maybe two people knew and refuted it by sharing an affair of which no one has accused you. And now, everyone knows it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I love the insight into Alexander's mind, and just how we talked earlier about the hubris, just how much hubris it must take to be like, I can do this. I can fix this.
I can defeat a hurricane. Right.
For me, I mean, I've lived with this album now for a few years, and so I feel like different stages of my life, different things hit. So I remember like when I first listened to it.
The first one for me was My Shot.
That's what I was going to say.
Musically was and lyrically was.
I think for me, that was the hook for me. This is sort of the now I'm in it. Just kind of like really excited about some of the wordplay in it, like the 3 different meanings of shot in that song. Like taking a shot, your shot is in your time in life, and then the actual bullet shot. Like that's just a really interesting thing to hinge the entire musical on. Is all these different ways of interpreting the word shot.
Even the different ways of interpreting the phrase "throwing away your shot." Right?
Yes,
so he says, "Lawrence, don't throw away your shot," meaning don't raise your pistol to the sky and fire, but actually shoot at the guy. Yeah.
And then kind of like in his duel, deciding to throw away his shot. So that was sort of the one that initially hit with me. But I remember for a long time, the one that really always hit me was. It's Quiet Uptown.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Just on an emotional gut punch level. And I think that, I'm not going to get too into it, but, I was going through a hard time at one point, and I think that, definitely not going through the death of a child. That's a totally different thing. But I think that song really hits at, you don't always have language for grief, and you don't always have language for depression, and it's unimaginable. And that idea of that being maybe the best thing you can do to console someone is just to say, like, you're going through the unimaginable right now. It's like the song itself understands there's no song you can really write that will handle this emotion,
And even like conveying that Alexander doesn't know what to say. Like there's when he's like, look around, Eliza, that like you've heard it so often in the play that look around how lucky we are to be alive right now. And just to change that, where he's like, I don't feel lucky to be alive right now. And like being so smart about it in that way, by like words can't speak it, he takes out words that we expect to come, and just the absence of those words conveys what we're like looking.
Another interesting callback in there is the I know I don't deserve you, Eliza, but hear me out, that would be enough. Right. So earlier Eliza is telling Alexander what would be enough. They seem very easy things. come home at the end of the day, let me into your heart, stay alive. He can't do any of those. He doesn't do any of those things.
That's right.
So then he makes a demand. Hear me out. That would be enough. Well, you didn't fulfill any of your At the time, of course, we don't know that he's not going to stay alive either. But
Yeah. Hear me out. What can you explain too? Like,
But then going back to the original question of like other songs that really were kind of like my favorites, when I saw Hamilton live, and I would say even just rewatching it this time and watching the stage thing, the thrill of Yorktown. It's awesome on the cast recording, but that is something I think when you visually see it, it's just like adrenaline to
and
me.
it's the closest it comes to like a hip hop performance with Hercules Mulligan breaking out and just spitting that line.
Yeah.
How did we know that this plan would work? We had a spy on the inside, that's right. Hercules
I'm a spy on the British government. I take the measurements, information, and then I smuggle it to my brother's revolutionary covenant. I'm running with the sons of liberty, and I am loving. Sometimes that happens when you up against the ruffians. We in the Chanel, somebody's gotta shuffle it. Hercules Mulligan, I need no introduction. When you knock me down, I get the shut back up.
How do you portray the Battle of Yorktown?
Yeah.
Something so huge and epic.
Yeah.
And the way that he is able to even like get nerdy about it. Like, I'm going to show you how they won Yorktown.
Right.
Let's get nerdy about this.
Military strategy.
Then you quiet it down with the world turned upside down, which I just found out was a real
song
that the British sang as they were retreating.
Yep.
And I guess it was just a pub song. Like it was just sort of a drinking song. The world turned upside down, you know?
And patriotism's a tough thing right now.
Tricky.
Like
it's
it's
tricky.
a weird thing to define. But even the beginning of that song, how does a ragtag volunteer army in need of a shower go on and beat a global superpower? I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, that was amazing.
Yeah.
Like that is insane that happened.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I was going to say Yorktown, just watching it, and that's the song they chose to perform at the Tonys when they had a performance at the Tonys. They chose Yorktown. Now, for me, I think everything you're saying, Dear Theodosia, It's Quiet Uptown, My Shot, like that's all have been in my rotation. The one that every time I hear it, I just love is Nonstop, and I feel like it's easy to overlook. But as an act closer, it like I don't know if you can beat it. To end it on such a high, and also kind of conveys that this his point wasn't the revolution. Like the thing that he is going for is this sort of influence and power, and he's going on because it didn't end. The act didn't end on Yorktown. It ends on Nonstop.
How do you write like you're running out of time? Write day and night like you're running out of time. Every day you fight like you're running out of time. Like you're running out of time. Like you're running out of time. How do you write like tomorrow won't arrive? How do you write like you need it to survive?
For a couple things, it's an incredible song to me. One, I think it's so exciting, just the way it builds and brings in all the other songs from the play up to that point. But also, it built this incredibly powerful, exciting, emotionally affecting song that is about how much someone writes. Like it's about, and I know that had a huge impact on Lin-Manuel Miranda when he saw how much he wrote every day. He was just like, this is inhuman. He had a writing desk that he could use while he was riding his horse. Like he wrote nonstop. And I love the end where everybody comes in trying to get their kind of influence on him. And like they all kind of culminate in like, you will never be satisfied until, or why do you write like history has its eyes on you? You will never be satisfied until history has its eyes on you. Why do you write like history has its eyes on you? The whole chorus sings it. And then it goes back into My Shot. And it ends on what he is about, Alexander Hamilton. Like at the end of the day,
it's him.
I'm not throwing away my shot. I am Alexander Hamilton.
Yeah.
Which also is called back in the when Eliza sings, you and your words, obsessed with your legacy. You're paranoid in every paragraph of how they perceive you. I don't know if you've seen this visual of Hamilton's song connections. So which songs are connected to each other. But Nonstop has 11 either thematic or musical connections to other Hamilton songs, which is wild.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah, just the more I listened to that one song, I was just like, "Holy cow!" Like
that's the sampling.
Doing so much,
you know,
right?
That's where the sampling comes in.
But and then I also want to bring up two other songs, and I think like we are super remiss in not having talked about this. Wait for it,
Yeah.
and The Room Where It Happens. Now, The Room Where It Happens is a song on the album, like fine. But I think as far as Leslie Odom Jr.'s, and we
Yes.
haven't talked about him at all,
Which is we can't not do that. Yeah.
that is his total performance masterpiece there. Because for the most part, even with Wait For It, he's pretty static. He doesn't move much. And then The Room Where It Happens, he is everywhere on that stage. And where he like the tablecloth gets pulled out from under him and he's jumping on tables, he's jumping all over the place. And hitting that note at the end.
Oh yeah.
While he's doing all this stuff, like that is for me the reason he won the Tony. He's nominated for an Emmy for that performance.
Yes.
I think it's just like that is the scene where Leslie Odom Jr. is just like unbelievable. And Wait For It is also an unbelievable performance and just an amazing song to start so quiet and to end, to get so big and then end so quiet. Like just the dynamics of it. Another thing I love about Wait For It is that it's at the end of a string of like Satisfied, the reprise of the drinking song, and then Wait For It. And I just like feel like there are so many times where like one song after another, I'm like, oh yeah, this one. Oh yeah, this one. And it's just like
they're stacked. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about or that we haven't covered?
So I definitely want to talk about what happens at the very end with Eliza coming out and the scream or the
scream, yeah,
or whatever you call it.
Yeah. The utterance. Okay, and so what are your thoughts on that? Do you have questions about it, or do you have a theory on that, or
both? I want to know what you think it means, or what it meant to you, and then I want to tell you what I was thinking.
I guess what I've come to think about it, and it's it's interesting. It's one of the elements of Hamilton I've encountered the least, because it's only visual. It's only. I guess the idea is that she kind of realizes that Hamilton's story is being passed on like she hoped. It's kind of a fourth wall breaking thing. That's how I read it. That like her wish for him, that his legacy is continued, is actually happening. But I don't know how I don't know.
So you don't see it as like a horror kind of scream?
I thought she kind of like, I thought it was kind of like an awe. Oh, you thought it was like a horror scream?
I don't know. I need to I honestly, I don't know that I have a whole lot of.
We didn't really talk about Pippa Sue either. Libertyville's own.
Yeah, that's true.
Pippa Sue. She went to the high school that I teach at. But so you didn't know, Nate? You thought it was a horror scream?
I think it could be interpreted that way.
Okay.
Brad, what do you think?
I think she's singing "Who Lives, Who Dies, Who Tells Your Story," and then the chorus is singing it, and she stops singing it. And it's "Will They Tell Your Story?" The chorus singing at Eliza. Will they tell your story? And then it says time. Will they tell your story? Time. And then Alexander leads her to the front. I agree with the fourth wall breaking thing. And I think she's looking and she's realizing that her story was told too. Let me show you what I'm proudest of, the orphanage. Has anyone heard of Eliza Hamilton starting an orphanage? Of course, never had.
That part, I always get welled up at
I
that
know,
part.
yeah.
Every single time.
And what a
Every
great
single
moment.
time. Yeah.
And it's also sung to the same tune as Forgiveness from It's Quiet Uptown. There's that idea in the dancer playing the bullet of violence begetting violence, but also then forgiveness and grace begetting forgiveness and grace.
That orphanage still exists, by the way.
Yeah, I saw that. So, yeah, I like that, Brad.
Yeah, so we get Eliza to start to tell her story. I stop wasting time on tears. I live another 50 years. Who's going to tell that story? Nobody until Lin-Manuel Miranda came along. And even though it's not the focus of this musical, it's told at the very end.
Purportedly, yeah.
But still, it's told.
Yeah, and I got to go back because I could be totally talking out my ass on this, but I don't know that you ever really get a scream type reaction of Hamilton being shot from her. And so to me,
when Philip
dies.
Of course, I was almost interpreting it as that whole last coda part is sort of like part of it is also Eliza sort of living on, and then there's just sort of like maybe even Hamilton looking down as almost like as a phantom or a ghost, kind of looking down and seeing how Eliza is carrying on her legacy. But then that scream at the end kind of zooms you right back to that moment of death, or at least Eliza coming out and just screaming at her husband being shot. Because I don't know that you ever really got the initial reaction of Eliza. But I think that's why I was saying it could kind of be both. Like, there's so much going on there. It could be sort of just the genuine like horror of seeing her not again, like, because they never deal with that in the musical. Like, what would it feel like to lose your son in a duel and then lose your husband in the same stupid way, but then still feel like you need to carry on the legacy of this man. I kind of feel like a lot of that is wrapped up in that scream. That scream is a scream of like, of grief and horror at this happening, but also a scream of like you're saying, sort of like a spiritual gasp of like, look at my story and how I lived on, and now my story is being told. I mean, it could be all those things, I think.
Well, I think obviously people have said so much about Hamilton. There's so much to say about it. This was more of a Hamilton appreciation podcast, so I hope that anybody who feels like there is more to be said that we didn't say, we agree. There's a whole lot to talk about. But Brad, thank you so much for coming on and being here. And it was good to see you and talk to you again.
Likewise.
Definitely. Brad, if anybody wants to kind of reach out and kind of see the work you're doing and the kind of research that you're working on, where can people find out more about you?
So I'm on Twitter at RettlerB. I'll warn you in advance that my Twitter is mostly about Bitcoin. So if you're interested in Bitcoin, go ahead and follow me.
Not so much about Hamilton.
I have tweeted about Hamilton once or twice.
Okay, all right.
And other money related kinds of things. But yeah, it's a little bit of philosophy and mostly Bitcoin.
Cool. Yeah. Well, thank you, Brad. This has been such a fun conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was great.
All right, so why don't we go ahead and talk about what we're going to be doing in our next episode, Ryan?
Yeah, well, our next major, like, kind of official episode is going to be another one with a guest.
Episode 96.
Episode 96, right? We're going to have a person we went to college with, Watson Jones, who is a pastor in Chicago, and we're excited to talk to him. He hasn't picked a movie yet. We don't know. We don't know exactly what movie we're going to do.
We've just solidified the guest.
Right.
That's all we've done so far.
Right, and really excited to talk to him. And we'll tell you what the movie is once we know. We're going to record another mini episode, just kind of like we did between Tree of Life and Labyrinth. We're going to tell you what the movie is. Maybe we'll catch up on what we've been watching.
Sure.
But maybe. But we're also going to be responding to an email we got that was just really interesting because somebody's going back through our archives and was listening to our episode from 2014 about...
I can't believe we go back that far. That's insane.
I know.
Yeah.
About the Avengers. And she had some questions about whether our predictions or whether our feelings played out, and
specifically about the Marvel universe,
right? Because we talked about anticipating fatigue and some other things, other predictions about it, and it was really interesting because now I don't think either of us talked about or thought about like, well, yeah,
we haven't.
It's years ago. Like
we haven't really revisited the Marvel universe in this podcast,
right? We're just going to talk generally about like what we said in 2014 and how we feel about the Marvel universe now, or what our interaction with it has been. And I was listening back to that episode, and we were talking about Marvel's plan up through 2019.
Right, we're beyond that.
Yeah. So we'll be talking about that, and we also just wanted to say, keep your questions coming, because if it's a question that like this, that we're sort of like, oh, yeah, that's a great way to think about it.
It's nice to get an email that gives us an excuse to maybe go back to those episodes and listen to our younger, fresher, versions of ourselves and kind of see how we thought about things back then.
Exactly.
So any questions at all about the podcast for us, we could probably, we should be able to fold that into this little episode we'll do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So looking forward to doing that. But until then, to give us those questions or to give us your feedback on today's episode about Hamilton, and again, about anything in the archives, let us know. You can reach us on Facebook, Can We Still Be Friends Podcast, Instagram, Can We Still Be Friends Pod, right? Yep. We got our website, canwestillbefriends.net, and you can email us. Our email address is feedback@canwestillbefriends.net. And then you can always give us a voicemail. Call the number
847-306-9532.
There it is. And again, Nate always kind of reminds you, but I'm going to do it this time.
Do it. Go for it. Just I'm handing the mic over to you. Yeah.
Thanks. Oh, I already had one, but thank you.
Take two. Take two mics.
All right. Anyway, you can record a voice memo in your phone and put it in an email and send that off to us, because our voicemail box does have a cutoff for you, and some people have been frustrated by that in the past, or just have dealt with it.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, any questions you have, we love to hear them. And as always,
thanks for listening.
And we'll
catch you next time.